Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our continuing weekly study in the Hebrew words. And we are in First Samuel chapter 21 and picking up with verse 8. Remember last week we left off with just a fascinating story that Jesus had referenced about David eating the temple bread and how, that all came about. Now there's a more another even more strange uh, verses that come up here. So we'll have some fun with this today. So we're starting at verse 8, and the Hebrew would read, Visham ish me avdei Shaul by hahu netzar lifnei Yahweh Shemo. And his name, and then it would be Doeg, me Adomi, of Vir Haroim Asher Leshaul. And this is just an interesting little insert here about a man whose name was Doeg, and he was a loyal servant of Saul, and he happened to be there at the tabernacle when David came. And interesting word we want to look at here. Why was this guy here? Who was he? He was not an Israelite, he was an Edomite. Edomites are of the ancestry of Esau, and of course, this would be Jacob's twin brother, and so he would be related, but they were not part of Israel. They went their separate ways. But here was a man, even though he was an Edomite, not part of Israel, not part of Jacob's lineage from Jacob. He was here, a servant of Saul, and here he was in the tabernacle. And it says he was detained. Lifnei, it says before, but it can mean in the presence of, before the face of, is what its literal meaning is here, that he was detained. But what does detained mean? So let's click on this. It says he was restrained, he was shut up, he was halted in a nifal, which is what this is because it begins with a noon prefix. He he stayed there under restraint, but it's to be restrained. It's something that it caused him to do this. It wasn't something that someone that he did out of his own. It came from within. That's the nifal form. Um, and so he was detained there, and it doesn't say Elohim. It uses the word Yahweh, which is known to be the compassionate, benevolent side of God, the instructive side. And so there's something very special about what was going on here. Um, Again, the Bible doesn't give us a lot. We look to some of the Jewish literature. One of the medieval commentators in the Hebrew and Jewish culture, Rashi, says that he was there studying Torah. That was the reason he was there. They also say that he was a convert. Obviously, he would have had to have been a convert to Judaism to be allowed to be there in this location. And it's just very, very interesting. The word Doeg itself, when you click on it, it doesn't give you a lot of um, hope for figuring it out because it just mentions that it was a name. So he did a little bit of research deeper into the other lexicons that are there, into the dictionary of the Targumim, which is the Aramaic. Nothing came up in the Targumim, but in the Hebrew and Chaldean lexicon by Gesenius, it told us that this has a root word of someone being fearful. So again, fear here being a reverence or respect of God. And so this guy has some admirable qualities here. He was obviously a servant of Saul, but yet he was a convert to the one true God, Yahweh. He was there dedicating this time to God's service, to the study of God's word, and he was in the temple, and he was being detained there because he felt God's presence compelling him to do so. But this sets up a very interesting scenario because obviously David is fleeing from Saul, and here at God's house, he runs into a loyal servant of Saul. And so we'll find out later in the next chapter that, you know, Doeg does rat out David and tell Saul that he saw him. So this is all just setting up a scenario, and that's why this little clip here is so beneficial. But again, he seems like he was trying to do the right thing, be a servant of God. And again, there's a lot of unknowns for the people in this time frame because Saul is king, David is fleeing, everything's kind of in a topsy-turvy turmoil here. So we leave that and go to verse 9, and David says to Ahimelech, the priest, he says, do you got any weapons here? Do you have a spear? Do you have a sword? Because he continues this little, remember, he's kind of telling a falsehood to the priest. He says, I was sent on, my king's business, and because it was so hasty, I couldn't even bring my wallet, didn't have my car keys, I couldn't pack a bag, didn't take my sword or a spear, because I just had to leave so quickly. Again, if you think of it, he's lying to the high priest. He's in the house of God and he's telling a ruse. He's telling a lie here. Um, just really incredible that how God's working through this and how David is behaving, but yet we know David to be one of the best kings that ever existed in the kingdom, and he was a man after God's own heart. And so a little challenging for us here to put this together. Obviously, David had a growing time. He was young here, not even king yet. And the Bible records the good, the bad, and the ugly here. And this is just probably showing what kind of person David was at this time, and that he had a lot of growing up to do. He had a lot of maturing to do. His relationship with God was still quite young, but yet, if we look at it from that aspect, we then understand the mercies of God, how He puts up with us when we do a lot of things in our early wanderings, if you will, that He is merciful to and brings us out of. And so he's telling this lie, wanting to know if there's any weapons there. He must know something is there because the priest said, the only thing that's here is the sword of Goliath, whom you've killed in the valley of Elah. And of course, how did it get there? What is Goliath's sword doing in the temple, in the tabernacle? He mentions some specifics of this sword, that it's wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. Again, this ephod is a very somewhat mysterious and very interesting garment. We see it is something that is worn by the priest. It's somewhat of a shoulder, goes over the shoulder, has a cape, like a mantle garment that is put on, and it's used in the service of God. So why is this sword hanging wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod in the tabernacle? It's up hanging up on the wall. Is it being hidden? Was it dedicated by David to God's service because God obviously helped him slay Goliath? And so he took this and put it there. We remember that this sword was extremely heavy. It was sized for Goliath. It wasn't sized for an average man. And David did use it to cut off Goliath's head, but this was a very heavy sword, heavier than an average person would have had. So it makes sense why he didn't use it while it was hanging there, obviously as a memorial. But yet we know that there's very strict instructions that you can't put any um, memorabilia in the tabernacle. You can't put anything there that could be taken as a graven image or an idol. And so maybe that's why it was hidden. But David realizes it's there. The priest gives it to him, and he takes it and somehow is able to carry it away, even though it's extremely heavy and a lot more than what he would really be wanting to use. The commentators, Jewish commentators, also say that along with the ephod was what is called the Urim and the Thummim were also kept there, and that they felt there was some of this Urim and Thummim divination taking place to give David direction in his life. That's what the sages would say. We don't have know that for sure. We just know that this is kind of a very interesting little insert here that gives us a little bit of insight of what's going on, but we don't have a full understanding of all what it means. But it is beautiful, and it does just give us another indication of how great God's word is and how many wonderful things there are for us to investigate and to learn. So God bless you. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye bye.